All right, then 3 days later, we have a very packed Aries house with the new moon, solar eclipse, and Aries conjunct Chiron, which the one through line I keep hearing from all these astrological podcasts and other YouTubes is like all these astrologers say, I usually don't spend too much time on Chiron, but with this, it's like Chiron is definitely getting people's attention. And so I'm saying I usually don't spend that much time on Chiron, but he is definitely getting my attention. So Sonia, you're the lunation expert in the group. Sonia does really great mindfulness videos on her YouTube, Celestial Astrology. She does these beautiful meditations for the new moon and full moon, and so this is why I call her the lunation expert. So I'm going to pass it over to you because you also have an Aries moon, so you feel expert for this one.
Yeah, I do. So yeah, no doubt I'll be feeling this one. Okay, I'm going to start with Austin Coppock talking about the crown, and I've got this illustration from Nicole. I'm going to try and say it right. Nicole, I've been practicing this as well. Nicole and Art, and she's got this Wild Way Oracle deck, and she's got us here with the bear with the crown, saying "Take the lead." And Austin Coppock also calls this deck the crown, and the reason is because it's double sun ruled. So we've really got this leadership energy coming through really strong, and he says to take particular notice when you've got, it's not very often that you get two signs a double rulership, and we've got a lot of these in April, so it's really interesting that all these decans are showing up, and I keep talking about double Mars and now double sun, and then the sun's at its exaltation degree as well. So we've got this new moon, which is about initiations, new beginnings. Usually we don't necessarily see what's started. It's like something being planted in the ground, and that's what you often see, particularly with eclipses, that small things become big over time. So it's not necessarily a major event happening on the day, but it's great to journal because smaller events might be happening that can later become significant. And Nicola has given us the title of Take the Lead and reminds us that this decan's about sovereignty and how you shape your world and the personal power, and also that you can be held accountable for your actions here. You know, when you act as a leader and you've got people following you, or even when you're shaping your own world, that you're accountable for those actions, and there's responsibilities that come with power. You know, we see that with the sextile with Pluto, even though it's not like exact at this time, but the sun is moving towards that square with the sun that we'll be talking, the sun square Pluto that we'll be talking about later. But this solar eclipse feels like an initiation into it, like we're being set onto this path, that events might be coming up and things are being illuminated as well. Like always, even though it's a new moon where things are initiated, we still see the luminaries together telling us something about this. And I've looked into this particular solar eclipse. We see this is where the moon passes between the sun and the earth, and that's where the shadow is cast and the moon blocks out the sun. So you see this wonderful corona, and the USA is going to be very lucky in seeing this across the middle of America. There's going to be it's going to cast a path all the way across, and it's going to create a cross sign with the eclipse from last year, the total solar eclipse that happened last year. So I think it's in 15 states it's going to be total, and then a partial eclipse in 49 states. So I think, yeah, if you want to see it, it's really now's your time. So what have I had some notes on the series. It's Saros series 139. And these series last for 1,300 years, 1,300 years that they cover. So you can look at the ingress chart of the first one to get some clues. But for us, we can just look back. The last one was in 2006, so it was March 2006, March 1988, and March 1970. So if you're old enough to have remembered March 1970, you can maybe think about events in your life and get some clues about where it's hitting in your chart. And I did look about whether it hits the same place. And apparently in each Saros series, it moves forward about 10 to 11 degrees each time. It moves slightly forward. So as the series progresses, it's in roughly the same area, but it just moves the story slightly on a little bit. So you can look back to where that was in your chart. And again, we do see leaders sometimes, particularly with this one being about the crown. Leaders coming to the stage and leaders exiting the stage. So we saw an exit on the lunar eclipse, which was the Taoiseach of Ireland, Varadkar, and thankfully it was a resignation, and there can be more unpleasant ways that leaders can exit, but it was nice that it was a chosen exit, and maybe we might see a new leader entering, but we might not even be aware. It might be a small event of a leader that then becomes significant in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, that we might see it. But yeah, for us in our own world, it's about like reassessing how we take responsibility, how we take power, where we have power and how we wield it, and really being accountable for that, because the sun represents our consciousness. So yeah, that's what's important for me. But what does everybody else think?
Go ahead. Who wants to talk?
I can go. I also wanted to throw in there too. I don't think you mentioned, but I read somewhere recently that this is also going to be at the exaltation degree of the sun. So it's like tripling down on that solar influence. So yeah, I think typically my advice for people with eclipses has been like what you were just saying, where it could be something big, but it could also be something small. This one just feels so loud that I just have a hard time believing there won't be loud events. I don't know, just with the sun at that degree, with Chiron, with like the US situation and world events. Yeah, I don't have any like specific predictions, but it feels very loud is, I guess, my 2 cents. And
yeah, we did have that conversation recently, didn't we, where we said, is it that cardinal eclipses are just louder, because they're the initiatory sign?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. I also think a lot about the sun and Mars combo as being very tied to choice and how we choose to act. So I guess for me, that's what I've been reflecting on too with this, is like, what is your personal power? Similar to what you just said, but choice being a big part of it, and how we choose to move about the world, really coming into play.
One of the things about just lunations in general, I think that like part-time witches will just use the moons, but like full moon and new moon kind of intentions. And if you think about a new moon, it's the darkest moment for the moon, right? It's at the exact same degree. And so if you think about it in the life cycle of a plant, you might later on in the summer have like the most luxurious moonflower plant that just takes over a trellis, and the Luna moths come, and like it smells like the ocean, and it's just this amazing like character in your yard. But when you plant it, you don't know that one little seed is going to be this like annual like character that you engage with, that you talk to, that you take pictures of, that you share on your socials. You don't know like how big of a player it's going to be when you plant the seed. And that's what we say, like, you don't know if that new moon moment is going to be as big as it is. So if the eclipse happens and you're like, well, what happened? Nothing happened. You may not realize it until later. And so you can look at it 6 months time. You can look at it 9 years from now or 18 years from now. Like if you think about transits, that's just a snapshot of the sky at a moment, which is also, this is going to be somebody's birth chart. You think about that too. Like we were all born at a transit moment. And so many political leaders were born with eclipse energy. A lot of the royal family was born with eclipse energy, being born day of or flanking days of an eclipse. So I look at this not only as we're going to look at the leaders that we have chosen, what's their story going to be that we see reflected in the eclipse moment, but also the potential that some baby will be born that then plants a seed of a huge character in our life 36 years from now. And we won't realize that in the moment because it'll just be a cute little baby. But that's how astrology can seem so subtle, but can also speak very loudly. And looking back through time, looking at nativities can give you some sort of context for it. But in a personal level, I like to use new moons because I'm a new moon child myself. So I find comfort in new moons. And, for anybody, this new moon might not speak to you very specifically, and you can look at your own natal chart, and if that 19-degree Aries either hits something very close to your chart by conjunction, so if you have something within a few degrees of 19 degrees Aries, that'll be fairly close, or if you have another fire sign that's around 19 degrees, or if you have another cardinal sign that's at 19 degrees. So if it's going to touch your chart in a specific way, it might be louder. And I agree with Janessa. I think it's going to be loud, but I think it'll be loud to people that have that signature in their chart where it'll speak personally to them. Like yesterday, I had a very loud transit that I didn't realize until Shauna kind of brought it up, that it was a Mars opposition, and it spoke very loudly. Like literally, I was sending them expletive-filled voice notes because I was so furious. And I didn't realize it until Shauna reflected back of oh, you're in a direct Mars opposition, to the minute. And so when a transit happens, it can speak to you very personally. And that's why I say astrology can help you put context into your story, not I'm having a bad day or I'm just angry at the world. It's I'm experiencing the stars through the filter of my nativity. And it kind of calmed me down. I was wearing a lot of red yesterday, and I changed into a bunch of green colors to mute it because it was starting to infuriate me. And it was also, I was drinking lots of coffee, and it was just infuriating me even more. So it's ways of mitigating or remediating a situation. I did not want to be that angry. I wanted to kind of channel it. And astrology helps you channel energy, which I think is very powerful, to be able to channel it instead of it just spilling over in messy or irreversible consequential ways. So with this particular solar eclipse, I feel especially if you have a placement that's around that 19 degree, 3 degrees on either side, I think would be pretty potent. There's usually, 15 degrees is, some astrologers will give, but the closer it is, the louder it will be. And there's no reason to fear it or no reason to approach it with trepidation, but just approach it with observation that maybe it will speak to you very personally. And if I can recommend anything, it's just write down the things that happened that day, because if it is subtle, you may not realize it until later. You may not realize it until 6 months from now, or a year and a half from now, or whatever. I mean, sometimes these cycles take time to grow out of the ground, to find a tendril to climb onto, to bloom, to pollinate. I mean, things aren't always so obvious. And again, like Saturn teaches, it's things that take a little bit longer have a lot longer memory or a lot longer effect to them. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents for the Aries eclipse.
Yeah, I just wanted to share something on that note of what you were saying, Krista. And I think it might have been Janessa that shared. Patrick Watson, who's another astrologer that we follow and learn from, shared that he had a eclipse that impacted his chart quite closely on his planet. So he was watching and waiting and journaling and doing everything that we do, and thought nothing happened. And then it turned out that his future stepdaughter was born on that day. So obviously it was an important eclipse for him, but he didn't actually meet his stepdaughter for some time. So it shows how an event, and yet that date became very important in his life now. But at the time he wasn't aware of what had happened. it wasn't an event for him at the time. But he came back to it and he could see how that eclipse mattered. So it's like a particular example of how that seed can be planted, metaphorically.
Yeah, and astrologers use anecdotes to relay story. And the way we're able to do that is because we collect stories. We're like the hoarders episodes of stories are astrologers, right? And when we sit with people in readings, we want to hear stories because that helps. One, we're hungry for them. We love astrology good that are actually good stories. But also, it's like putting the astrological moment into context of a human life. It's how we remember things. Like astrology is like the oldest story of time because it's a story, not just a data fact that has been lost in some Croatian monastery's record. It's like it's a story that we continue to tell. So it's I think it's important work, but it's also just fun to write down your own story of what happened and to be able to revert back to what happened with the astrology of that day. The Honeycomb Collective does those really beautiful journals that has your personal transit, and you can write the story in it. But as long as you date, like year and month and day, you can go back and look at the ephemeris of what was happening that day, of even if it just seems minor. Sometimes the minor things become, eclipses great things become big, and big things become small. So sometimes those minor things actually do grow into something very monumental. So even writing down the tiny little omens that happen on an eclipse day might seem insignificant now, but may show themselves to be greater later on. Should we move on? Anybody? Does anybody have any Aries 2 placements? Sonia? Shauna has some Cancer 2 placements that will square this for sure.
Yeah, I've got my Saturn in there, and he's my Lord of the Year.
Right.
So this will be fun.
Yeah.
How about in the chat? Anybody? I know someone has a retrograde Mercury in Aries, but
yeah, and throw questions if you have any that we can look at, and as we go through these, I'm gonna. You got something, Shauna?
I was just going to say, before we move to the next slide, it's not, well, kind of 2 points. First, just to kind of piggyback off of what you said as far as like embodying astrology, even just if you're journaling or you don't even journal, to get into the habit, make notes, even just about the clothing you're wearing. Like Krista referenced, having worn red yesterday, and she needed to embody that Mars yesterday. For the situation she was taking on. So that was perfect. But being able to bring herself back down and hit the other side of the color wheel and, embody Venus at that point with all the green was a great thing. Did you wear your green lipstick today? You're still a little small in my picture.
I don't have green lipstick, but as you were talking, I just realized I went to a school advisory council meeting, and the whole district, the mascot is called the Warriors, and I just realized that. So everybody was wearing red. I wore red because it was like, oh, it's the Warriors. That's like the color of the mascot.
Yeah.
So everybody was on fire yesterday. But yeah, I don't have green lipstick.
And rightfully so for the topic.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess so. And then I don't want to take it political or anything else, because I cannot speak to those things with any kind of education. But the one thing that this particular chart makes me think of is early 2020, when we had just that huge planetary collision in Capricorn. But this one happens to be in another cardinal sign, but this one happens to be in Aries. And yes, it's some different planets at play, but it just makes me wonder moving forward how those things are going to come to fruition as the group, especially with Saturn still being in Pisces, and how that whole collective mindset might come into play, and what we're not seeing at the moment. So I think that'll be really, really interesting to see what comes up.
Yeah, and we're Mars is approaching Saturn. I think they're conjunct on the 10th, so we're 2 days away from a Mars-Saturn conjunction. We're about 13 days, 12 days from a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So there's some bigger stories happening. It's almost like Mercury doesn't know where to go. He's like, maybe I should just go check on the sun and the moon real quick before I go forward, because there's some big stories happening.